Today we're going to do 2.1.2, solving ax squared equals b. The first slide is important because there's homework questions on it, but you really don't use it. It's really just telling you why the rest of the lesson happens the way it is. So on the first slide it says solve what x squared equals 25 using a graph, and they would give you the graph. So if you graph this, what happens is you graph y equals x squared, which from the first video is a parabola, right? So we get the parabola. I'm just going to sketch it like this. And then they tell you to graph y equals 25 because they're equal to each other. And so you get 25 up here. And really all you're doing is finding out where the parabola hits the line. And it hits here and here. And really which ends up being what, 5 and negative 5? So the answer is 5 and negative 5. And this is the important part of the graph. The important part is that you see the parabola and the line hit 2 times. So that means you have to have 2 answers every time, all the time. Unless you have a word problem, you're going to have 2 answers for all things with x squared. So that's why you have a positive 5 and a negative 5. The chart also is not very popular, but there's a homework question about it. It gives you 2x squared and 32. And on your chart, it gives you x, and it actually doesn't give you y. It actually gives you 2x squared. And so you look on the 2x squared part, where does it equal 32? It equals 32 here and here, so your answers are negative 4 and 4. And again, these 2 slides are just to show you that you need to have 2 answers every time. Okay, so let's talk about what you're really going to do. This is what all of your problems are going to look like. The first one starts with a squared equals 36. And you need to know that squared and square root are inverses of each other. They're opposites. If you look on any calculator, big or small, wherever there's an x squared button, right above it is a square root because they undo each other. So anytime you have a squared, you need to get rid of this. My goal is to solve. That means I want a by itself. So the only way I know how to get rid of a squared is to square root it, because squares and square roots cancel each other out and you just have an a. However, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we have to put the square root of 36, and I know that the square root of 36 is 6. However, there's a special new little symbol. This new little symbol, it looks like this. It's called plus or minus, because it's a plus and a minus. And this is your answer, and I'm going to tell you why it is your answer. Because if you took these and you want to get back to this, if you did 6 times 6, you would get 36. So that means 6 squared is 36. However, you could also do negative 6 times negative 6, and that also gives you 36. So this question's asking, what squared gives me 36? Well, there's actually 2 numbers that when I square them, multiply them by themselves, they equal 36, and we're lazy. Technically, you could write this as a equals 6 and a equals negative 6, but lots of us are lazy, and you're going to start seeing this sign, so you might as well just get used to writing it. The next one just has an extra step to it. It says b squared plus 1 equals 36. And so this is just like solving an equation. You have to get the letter with it squared by itself first. So you got to move this 1. So we're going to subtract 1 to both sides. And we're going to get b squared equals 35. I don't want the squared, so I square root. And what I do to one side, I do to the other. So I get b equals plus or minus the square root of 35. And then you don't know the square root of 35. So then you ask yourself, does it break down? Like the last lesson, and 35 is 7 times 5, and 7 and 5 aren't on that list of square roots, simplifying square roots, so like this is it. You just leave this problem like this. Do not turn it into a decimal, leave it as a square root. The next guy, I need to start saving some room on this, so I don't have to keep erasing. The next guy says 3c squared equals 36. So again, I have to get c squared by itself. And when I have a number in front, that's multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3, sorry. So c squared equals, and 36 divided by 3 gives me 12. I need to get rid of the squared, so I square root both sides. I get c equals plus or minus the square root of 12. Now, square root of 12 should be like, oh wait, I can't stop there, because you see it and you should automatically think, hey, isn't 4 times 3 equal to 12, and don't I know the square root of 4? And the answer to all of those is yes. So you look at this and you say, hey, I know that 12 is 4 and 3. So I know that c actually equals plus or minus 2 square root 3, And that's my answer. If the square root breaks down, you gotta break that sucker down all the time, every time. The next guy, just adds some more steps to it. 3a squared plus 1 equals 81. Just like solving an equation, I'm going to subtract first. So I get 3a, let's pretend I wrote that right. This should be an 82. I was getting ahead of myself. 3a squared equals 81 now. And then I divide by 3, so a squared equals 81 divided by 3 is 27. Right? So just like solving a regular equation, you add or subtract first, you divide last, and now this is the new part. So like this should be old stuff, like just solve an equation. Now I have a squared answer, so I square root both sides. A equals plus or minus the square root of 27. But again, you should think, hey, 27, that's 9 times 3, and I know the square root of 9. So this gives you square root 9, square root 3. So A equals plus or minus 3 square root 3. And that is your final answer. Okay, let's get a couple problems harder. Ooh, fractions. We love fractions. Okay, we get 3 over 5 x squared equals 12. And I'm only going to do one of these. There's 2 on the slide, but they're kind of the same thing, so I'm just going to do one. We don't really like fractions. Fractions are not our friends. We also know that anything in front of the x squared we should divide. However, way back when you learned fractions, you should have learned that when you divide a fraction, it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So if I want these to cancel out, I'm going to choose to multiply this by 5/3, because then the 5's cancel and the 3's cancel, and I just have x squared left, and that's nice, that's what I want. But again, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So you get 5 over 3. You can do this however you want. 12, so this is like 12 over 1. 12 times 5 is 60 divided by 3. 60 divided by 3 is 20, so I get x squared equals 20 there. And then I just keep going. I have the squared, so I square root both sides. I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 20. 20 should ring a bell in your head. The square root of 20 is 4. So you get x equals plus or minus 4 square root 5, and the square root of 4 gives me 2. So x equals plus or minus 2 square root 5. Okay? Okay, now let's talk about when the answers are a little bit different, and then I'll take a break and do the second half of the lesson because Abby's hand is getting tired from holding the camera. Okay, the word problems. Here's what you do on the word problems. Again, I'm only going to do one of them because they are the same. So it says, a quarter is dropped 60 feet from the roof of a school building. To determine how long the quarter will be in the air, use the equation D equals 16t squared. And they'll give you that equation. I don't think you have to have that memorized. So it says, so you just have this formula and you need to figure out what this means. D is going to stand for distance, and T is going to stand for time. And they give you the number 60 feet. So 60 feet is going to be my distance. So I have 60 equals 16t squared. And now here's where all the rules I just said kind of change because it's a word problem. So I'm going to do the same math. I'm going to divide by 16, divide by 16. 60 divided by 16 is 3.75 equals t squared. And I'm actually going to make that into a decimal. And then to get rid of squares, I'm going to square root. So I get plus or minus the square root of 3.75 equals t. Now, here's where things get different. First of all, you don't need the plus or minus because t is time and you don't have negative time. You can't go back in time. So I don't actually need the plus or minus in this because it's a word problem. The next thing that's different is that we're actually going to get a decimal because you would never tell someone that it took the square root of 3.75 for a quarter to fall. So you need to get in your calculator. The square root of 3.75 is, it took 1.936 blah 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 seconds for it to fall. Like that is a much, like you would tell somebody it took 1.9 seconds, not the square root of 3.75 seconds. So that gets you through the first half of the lesson.